Okay. Good to go.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to those in attendance at this remote meeting of the Local Review Board of Aberdeen City Council. My name is Councillor Henrickson, and I'll be chairing the meeting today with Councillors MacDonald and Councillor Thompson. We are also in attendance and will be participating. Please note that the meeting will be recorded and published online for public access after the meeting. You are reminded to know that we may have members of the public or press observing today's proceedings. Can I ask those who are observing today's meeting to keep their microphones and cameras switched off throughout? Can members of the review board leave their cameras on but mute their microphones when not speaking? As a local review body contains quasi-judicial business, members are reminded that they should not leave the meeting during consideration of any of the reviews. This meeting has been convened in response to requests for a review of decision taking by the appointed officer under the council scheme of delegation. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you very much, convener. I have a connection to item 3 in the agenda as I'm a member of Nest Trans board. However, having applied the objective test, I don't consider I have an interest to declare because my connection to this agenda item cannot reasonably be regarded as being so significant as to be likely to influence the discussion or decision making on this item.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald, for being so transparent. Okay. Members of the local review body have before them copies of the review documents as listed in the notice calling the meeting. I will now ask Mrs. Lindsay McBain, the assistant clerk, to outline the procedures to be followed in the conduct of these reviews.
Thank you, convener. Members have the procedure note which was circulated with the meeting papers and is intended to set out the wider framework within which the review process operates. From this, it is clear that the first task for the review body is to come to a decision on whether the review documents contain sufficient information for the case to be determined without further procedure, and by that it is meant without further information or representations. To assist, I feel it would be helpful to mention the following. Firstly, that the regulations governing the local review process requires that all matters which the applicant intends to raise in the review must be set out in or accompany the notice of review. Secondly, that the focus of the review should be on the basis of what was before the appointed officer when a decision was made, and only in exceptional circumstances will new or additional matters be permitted to be taken into account. Thirdly, to note that the modernisation of the planning system, which included revisal of the planning appeals process, which this local review body is part, removed the previous right on the part of an applicant to insist on a hearing and replace that with the LRB, providing them with the power to choose a procedure which more accurately reflects the facts and circumstances of the individual case. And lastly, that guidance issued by the Scottish Government's Chief Planner in 2011 stated that reviews by LRBs should be conducted by means of full consideration of that application afresh. This review should take the form of a structured discussion led by the chairperson to consider the matter set out in the notice of review before you, and I would conclude by drawing your attention in particular to points 10 to 12 of the procedure note. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McBain. Sorry about that. Turning to consideration of the first review in respect to the decision to refuse the application for detailed planning permission for the change of use and conversion of Class 4 office building to form 2 residential flats, alteration and installation of replacement windows and doors, formation of an entrance door from existing window opening, associated landscaping works, and installation of a retractable bollards at Studio 3, 32 Albert Street, Aberdeen, AB 25 1XR. Application reference 220432/DPP. We will now hear from the planning advisor in attendance, Miss Lucy Green, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would point out that Ms. Green attends today's meeting to provide us with necessary professional planning guidance, because she has not been involved in early considerations of the application under review. Ms Green will not have the acts to express any view on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect her role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance over. Thank you. Over to you, Ms Green.
Thank you and good morning, convener and councillors. Just let me get my presentation up on the screen. Has that come up? So this case for review relates to an application for a change of use from office to Form 2 residential flats and associated works at 32 Albert Street. And the review has been submitted with all the necessary information within the time limit of 3 months following the decision of the appointed officer. The applicant did indicate on the notice of review that there were new matters raised. That was a lease agreement. However, looking at the submissions, the lease agreement was actually referred to in emails to the case officer. So although the actual agreement itself wasn't in front of the case officer, it was referred to in the discussions. In terms of the procedure by which the review will be conducted, the applicant has expressed the view that the review may proceed on the basis of the information submitted. So I'll now proceed to provide some background information before handing back to decide how to proceed. Okay, this is the location plan, just showing what was the vestry of the church, which is located here. And it's a piandid roofed 3-bay annex which adjoins the category B listed church building. It was converted in the 1990s to offices and studios, and the applicant states that the application premises have been vacant for a number of years. They've submitted internal photographs of the premises. The site also lies within the Albine Place and Rubeslaw Conservation Area. So just moving on to an aerial photograph of the premises. That's obviously the church that you see from Queen's Road, and then it's this rear annex that's the application site along with the car park. Just moving on to a 3D image looking from the north there. So that's the application premises there. And the application concerns this rear part, which was the vestry, as I said. And the premises have a separate entrance off Albert Street. And they were earlier converted to offices along with the church. That's just a street view image from the lane to the north, looking down the car park. So moving on to the proposals. This is showing the proposed layout here. One flat on each floor. The path, the car park's been reduced by 2 spaces in this plan, just to provide space for the landscaping and the path. And you can see that the entrance off Albert Street would be retained for the offices, whereas the flats would be entered from the other side. And this is just the plan as existing. So as I said, 1 2-bed flat would be provided on each floor. The entrance would be on the west side. There's also a listed building consent for the internal alterations, the replacement of the windows and doors, forming an entrance door from a window, the same works that are proposed under this application, and that has also been refused. So the external changes are also involve installing a footpath, bin stores and cycle stores, soft landscaping and retractable bollards, which are proposed along the lane boundary to the car park, just shown along there. We're just moving on to the floor plans. ground floor flat and the first floor flat. And in terms of the elevations, it's just replacement windows that would be installed, and that's the Albert Street elevation. And that's the opposite side, the west side. And you can see that this new door opening has been created in an existing window opening. New door installed in an existing doorway. And these windows remain as they are, whilst replacement frames would be installed to those. And that's the north elevation, so that would again be replacement windows just to provide opening lights. These are the details of the windows. There is a slight anomaly in the plans because the elevations state that the windows would be timber, whereas these indicate aluminium clad in timber. That was an anomaly picked up by the case officer as well. So, and these are the details of the door, which would be a composite door with double glazing, and well, it's quite small there, but it's externally mounted moulding rather than a sort of traditional panel that you would get in a timber door. So moving on to the reasons for refusal, stated in full in the report of handling. Firstly, it stated that although residential use may be appropriate, the proposal lacks the appropriate level of external amenity space. Secondly, the quality of development and well-being of the occupants due to the lack of external amenity space. And so the proposal would be contrary to policy D1 on design and D2 on amenity. And lastly, the composite doors do not preserve and protect the character of the listed building and are contrary to D4 on historic environment, Scottish planning policy and the historic environment policy statement, as well as supplementary guidance on replacement windows and doors and Historic Environment Scotland's managing change guidance on doorways. In terms of consultations, Rhodes team were consulted. They had no objection, and it was further noted that although 12 spaces are proposed, 10 spaces would actually be adequate for the offices. The waste team had no objection, and Queen's Cross and Hollow Community Council had no comments, and there were no representations. So in terms of the applicant's case, finally, it was stated that there was insufficient time to consider the request from the case officer for additional amenity space, and that related to a further reduction of 2 parking spaces to provide more amenity space. The applicant stated, and in relation to the lease, that the parking spaces are leased to the offices on both the upper and lower floors. They further contended that amenity space isn't necessary as there are nearby public amenities, that there was insufficient time to respond to the refusal of the flat entrance doors, and that the application site has not been occupied for 10 years. Although it's been part of a larger lease, it hasn't actually been used. So at this point, I will hand back to you for a decision on how to proceed. I'll just stop sharing.
Thank you, Ms. Green. We now need to consider whether we have sufficient information for us today to make a decision on the application. Members, remember that if you do not feel you have enough information to take a decision, you can request that further written information be provided, hearings be arranged, or a site visit undertaken. I'm quite happy that I have enough information to proceed. Councillor MacDonald, could you please state if you have sufficient information to make a decision?
Yes, convener, I feel I have sufficient information today. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, could you please state if you have sufficient information to make a decision?
Yes, convener, I feel that I do, thank you.
Thank you. And as members feel that they have sufficient information, we will now hear from Ms Green on the relevant planning policies and considerations for this review. Over to you, Ms Green. You're on mute.
Thanks. Right, I'll just move my slides on to the policies. So in terms of the development plan considerations, the proposed plan has not yet been adopted, expected next week. And so the 2017 plan remains extant. Both sets of policies are relevant and material considerations, however. The sites covered by the West End Office's policy, and although residential use is accepted in principle, there's no particular criteria by which to assess. So policy H1 would be the policy that would use as relevant in terms of new residential development, and it has criteria referring to the character and amenity of the surrounding area. NPF4, the National Planning Framework, which are expected to be adopted on Tuesday morning, now carries significant weight as well. I'll just move on to policy on amenity, and this is a policy from the proposed local development plan. So in terms of residential developments, it has some criteria for external amenity space. I've just highlighted two of them. Ensure minimum standards for external amenity space. We don't actually have a standard in place for that yet. That will come later in Aberdeen planning guidance. Then also more relevant is access to usable private and semi-private open spaces, sitting out areas by way of balconies, terraces, or private or communal gardens. So that's in the proposed plan. Design policy, and again, not all proposals will be of a scale that makes significant difference to place making, but good design and detailing adds to the attractiveness of the built environment. So those factors to consider. Turning to policies on the historic environment. So policies D4 and D6 from the adopted and proposed plans, those seek to protect and preserve and enhance the historic environment. There's also in the managing change guidance, changes such as doors are highlighted as potentially having a negative cumulative impact on the character of areas, historic areas. And this table is just taken from the doorways guidance, which is supplementary guidance linked to the adopted plan. But it looks at, you can find it, composite doors. So for a listed building, replacing with composite doors is not acceptable according to the supplementary guidance. So in terms of evaluation, the primacy of the development plan, with the proposed plan being also a significant material consideration, and all applications to be determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. So the basis for this decision, would the proposal comply with the West End Office policy? Those two policies are in the proposed and adopted plan. How would it affect the character and amenity of the area? and would there be a satisfactory level of external amenity? And the relevant policies for that are H1 residential areas, the D1 design policy, and D2 amenity from the proposed plan. And in terms of the doors, do the doors comply with the guidance, and what's their impact on the character of the listed building? And overall, does the proposal comply with the development plan, or are there material considerations that would indicate otherwise? So thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Greens. Any questions? Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you very much. Just in terms, this is a fairly minor point, I suspect, but I didn't quite understand the relevance of the car parking and the offices upper and lower. Does that refer to the potential offices that haven't been used? I'm thinking, is that car park for that whole building? Is what my understanding is. So what's the upper and lower offices?
They're within the church. So what the applicant is saying, although I suppose we need to bear in mind also that land ownership isn't a planning issue, but in response to the case officer's request to have 2 more parking spaces changed to amenity space, the applicant has said that the remaining car parking spaces of 12 are allocated in terms of the lease to existing offices, which I think are in the upper level, and offices that are being leased currently, which are in the lower level. Might be the other way around, but some are occupied and leased and others are in the process of being leased. So that was does that answer?
Yeah, thank you. And so so there is no car parking space for anybody who might either rent or buy, if that's what happens, the properties that are going to be made into flats. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, that's what I gleaned from. Yeah. Okay, and well, I suppose the other thing around the doors, was there discussion around perhaps having a look again at not having composite doors? Is there a way of getting around that at all? Do we know?
Well, I understand there was some discussion, although the applicant says in their submissions that they didn't have time to respond. So that's all I can really say about that.
Understood, thank you.
Councillor Thompson, do you have any questions?
Yeah, just around the amenity space as it stands. I suppose seeing the plan there, it looks like quite limited space, and the additional 2 spaces that were requested by planning were to increase that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Would that bring it more in line with sort of current standards as far as available amenity space is concerned?
Yes, I mean, we don't have actual size standards in place at the moment, but yes, that the case officer would have appeared to feel that that would have been sufficient amenity space.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor MacDonald.
Just following on from that, I got the impression though that the space that had been created was more for access to get round the back rather than to have a barbecue or something similar.
I mean, the nature of it is it's a footpath and then a kind of long linear, strip of landscaping. So difficult to have a barbecue, maybe. But...
Yeah.
I have one question that I just picked it up with listed building consent. Did you say that the listing building consent hadn't been given for putting the new doorway in? Is that correct?
Yes, that's been refused.
Okay, so my next question, maybe this is one for legal afterwards, but would that sort of null and void the application at all, or
Well,
would that be the case? But I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway, just for clarity.
I mean, they would need listed building consent to install the doors, but we just need to look at this application separately on its merits.
Okay, so leading on from I think it was Councillor MacDonald's question about the composite doors. How much time were they actually given between receiving this notice of review and being able to comment on that? You know that?
I don't know that. I think the emails were in the submissions. However, whether it was raised earlier, I couldn't say with any clarity, because there are various issues that were discussed in those emails, and I'm just opening them. Sorry, there's quite long emails.
I'm just concerned that they weren't given enough time to respond.
I mean, I think what the case officer said in the report is that because of the issue of the amenity space, they may not have, raised other issues because the amenity space issue was the one that they were looking at. Yeah, it's difficult for me to tell from the correspondence, because I think there was a site visit as well, to know exactly when matters were raised. But I mean, I suppose we just need to consider what's in front of us now.
And yeah, I obviously clarifying that. Any just with regard to amenity space, I think it's quite difficult to with older buildings to ensure that you can actually have amenity space within it. Would that be something that we could take into consideration? Say, I noticed looking at the plans that one of the concerns was walking past the windows of the downstairs flat and the possibility of looking in. And I was just wondering whether there was something around the fact that it's in an inner city area where that it's quite common in other things. Would that be a mitigating factor that we could take into account for the path?
It's certainly to consider the context is a relevant consideration, and I suppose in terms of the listed building, yes, I mean you would look at the particular merits of the site, and part of that is it's a listed building that would be brought back into use. That would be a relevant consideration.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Green. Any further questions? No?
Convener,
Councillor MacDonald, yes.
is it relevant at this point to bring up something that's in the papers or in front of us? I just wondered on page 7, it mentions a raised arm barrier to the car park is pending consideration. Is that pending consideration just by the applicants, or is there a process that is pending decision on that?
my understanding is that that was an earlier proposal to have a raised arm, and that the retractable bollards were the other current
Solution.
proposal. Yeah.
I see. Okay, I'm with you now. Okay, that was just a small matter. Thanks.
Ask any questions if I could. It's important. Any further questions? I don't have any. Councillor Thompson? Councillor MacDonald? No. In accordance with the procedure notes circulated for the local review body, we'll now discuss and decide the manner in which the review is to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case have been considered and taken into account. We now come to the determination. So I'll go first. I think the reuse of buildings is an important one that we should encourage. However, with this one, I am concerned about the doors, and looking at the fact that it's a listed building. I don't think that the doors that are proposed, being of a composite design, fit the character of the building. So I will be upholding the planner's offer of the decision, based mainly on policy D6, the historical environment, and the supplemental guidance on the doors. Councillor MacDonald, could you please state your decision in respect to the application and state for the minute the grounds for that decision, referring to planning policy where appropriate?
Thank you very much, convener. I too agree that converting properties in the West End into livable space is the way to go, and but it has to be done in a way that it doesn't affect those that are going to live in it. And my reason for not supporting this application today is around the amenity space, and that would be D2, the policy that was referred to earlier. I genuinely I know the building, it's beautiful. I think it's been very sensitively done in the past, but I think this is not the right setup for people to live in that end of the building, and for that reason I would be upholding the officer's recommendation to refuse.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. Councillor Thompson, could you please state your decision in respect to the application and state for the minute the grounds for that decision, referring to planning policy where appropriate?
Thank you, convener. I too am minded to uphold the decision of the planning officer in this case, and my reasons are very much along the lines already stated. Although, as you say, it is great to see proposals to reuse office space, especially as working patterns are changing, especially, and this is a listed building. I just don't think this is the right development here. The lack of amenity space, as mentioned under policy D2, at the moment there is limited what could be classed amenity space, and most of that is taken up with footpaths, so there is little usable space. It's also a landmark building in a very prominent position in Aberdeen, and as such, D6, policy D6 around historic environment, I think it's absolutely imperative that any development door-wise is in keeping with that policy as well. So those are my reasons for my decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. We're in agreement, and I think we've covered everything there. So the local review board has therefore agreed to unanimously uphold the decision of the appointed officer, and the application is therefore refused. Please note that the as we've upheld the decision, I don't think there's any reason to add any conditions to that. So we'll skip that.
Just need to move on.
What was that?
Sorry, I was just saying that's fine. Yeah, because you've refused it, we don't need to consider that.
Yes, yeah, it was something that suddenly dawned on me while I was talking. Please note that the decision notice from today's meeting will be issued to the applicant or agent after the meeting. Thank you very much for that one. Now turning to the request for the second review in respect to the decision to refuse the application for detailed planning application for the formation of a surface car park at land off Dice Avenue, Aberdeen, AB21 OBH, application reference 211759/DPP. We will now hear the planning advisor in attendance, Ms. Green, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would point out that Ms. Green attends today's meeting, provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance because she has not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Ms. Green will not, however, be asked to express any view on the merits of the proposed development, and in fact, her role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Back to you, Ms. Green.
Thank you. Just share my screen again. Strange. Showing the old presentation that isn't even open now. Right. Sorry about this. Right, I'll try again. Okay, that's the right one. So this review relates to the refusal of an application for formation of a surface car park on land off Dice Drive. And the review was submitted with all the necessary information within the time limit of 3 months following the decision of the appointed officer. The applicant has indicated on the notice of review that there are new matters that have been raised in the submissions. The new matter raised by the applicant was the parking survey, which was in the transport statement of case. And it stated that those could not have been undertaken at the time of the application due to the ongoing effects of COVID. Before I just hand over to legal for the advice on new matters, I'll just mention there was also further submission from the airport operator who made representations. They raised a new matter, which was application 221436 DPP, which was an extension to an existing car park at International Gate. And that hadn't been submitted at the time of the refusal of this application that's under review. So I'll just hand over to legal for some further advice on that.
Yes, if it would be helpful, I can set out the test to be applied. The test when new matters are before the LRB is set out within the legislation, which is as follows. In a review, a party to the proceedings is not to raise any matter which was not before the appointed person at the time the determination reviewed was made, unless that party can demonstrate that the matter could not have been raised before that time, or that its not being raised before that time was as a consequence of exceptional circumstances. The second part of the test is that nothing in subsection 1, so the 2 parts I've just referred to, affects any requirement or entitlement to have regard to the provisions of the development plan or any other material considerations. I'm happy to answer any other questions that you've got in regards to that, but that is the test that be applied for new matters.
Shall I continue through my presentation to the part where you make a decision on how to proceed?
Yes, please. Ms.
For that, yeah.
Make a decision once we've-
Right, just share my screen again. In terms of the procedure by which the review will be conducted, the applicant has expressed the view that the review may proceed on the basis of the information submitted. So I'll provide some more background information on the case before handing back for a decision on that. So this is the location plan. Here on the right, you can see the airport roundabout, the airport, the car park, short stay car park in front of the airport, and this is the application site shown, the red line boundary shown on this plan here. So it relates to an area of vacant ground within what's known as Aberdeen Business Park, and it forms part of the Kirkhill Industrial Estate, with other business and industrial land surrounding the Aberdeen International Airport. Extends to 0.69 of hectares, and it's a scrub, sort of rough grass on the site at the moment, surrounded by built development with airport staff car park, small industrial units, a warehouse to the south, and a car park to the west with an industrial use located on the opposite side of Thistle Road. And there's also an electricity substation immediately to the north. And there's, I'll just move on to the next plan and you'll be able to see there's an informal and unmade footpath just crossing the southern area of the site. That's that one referring to. So that's just the aerial view showing the site here. That's the airport terminal building. And this is a street view image taken from Dice Avenue, which is to the sort of southwest of the site. So looking across the site here, you can just see the airport roundabout, that just there in the distance. So the layout plan. So detailed planning permission is sought for the construction of the 274 space car park, and it's intended that it would serve both airport passengers as well as workers from the surrounding business and industrial area. It'd be finished in hard surface and would have areas of landscape around its edges. It would take access and egress from a new junction onto the turning circle at the eastern end of Dice Avenue. Drainage trenches would be provided in between the car parking spaces, and a swale to provide suds to deal with surface water discharge would be located along the north edge. I've got a landscape plan to show you in a moment. So of the 274 spaces, the application states that 70 spaces would be for electric vehicles. 18 charging spaces would be installed initially, and 42 spaces would have cabling provided so that equipment could be installed at a later date. And there would also be 12 spaces for disabled users. And this is the landscape plan showing the swale along the north edge and planting along some of the edges. In terms of submissions, there are various statements on drainage, an ecological appraisal of the site, a transport statement. In terms of this review, there's a transport statement of case with a parking survey. There's an operational strategy statement and a planning statement. In terms of consultations, the roads team objected to the proposal. So what they said was that the site's located in the outer city in terms of the parking standards. There's no controlled parking measures within the area. They concluded that the proposal is contrary to council policies for reducing private vehicle trips and that it undermines the viability of alternative sustainable transport. Highlighted the Scottish Government's climate change delivery plan, which has a commitment to reduce car kilometres by 20% by 2030, and that they also considered that there's already sufficient long-term parking around the Dice area. And additionally, they noted that there's one car park located on Wellheads Drive, which was being used as a COVID testing centre, and that's now reverted to long stay park and depart car park serving the airport. It was noted by roads that vehicular access would be via Dice Avenue and the access was acceptable. There were 5 representations and they raised various issues. So first of all, stating that the application conflicted with the requirements of Scottish planning policy because it would encourage an unsustainable pattern of travel to the airport, and that parking for private cars shouldn't be encouraged. That there's no practical pedestrian route between the car park and the airport, which will result in a 1.5 kilometre walk, or pedestrians taking informal shortcuts across adjoining private land. It was stated that electric vehicles could be retrofitted within existing car parks. Sorry, electric vehicle charging could be retrofitted rather than creating new parking. They made the point about the Wellheads car park that was being used as a test centre and would revert to use as an airport car park. They highlighted that the proposed development doesn't form part of the airport master plan and it doesn't contribute to sustainable growth. That the proposed development of an airport car park doesn't fall within the description of business and employment land. They're referring to the policy there for business and industrial land. And it fails to provide employment or economic benefits. That permitting the proposed development would compromise the ability to minimise traffic generated by the airport, and it makes no contribution to encouraging more sustainable travel choices. That there should be a low emissions zone set up for vehicles parking at the airport. That cars parked at the airport could be used in trials associated with battery storage. That the proposed shuttle bus service mentioned by the applicant is unlikely to be commercially viable for the size of car park. And also that the applicant hadn't taken into account the capacity for 1,400 spaces at Cairn Industrial Park, which are not currently in use, but the owner had stated that they were about to recommence operations, not at the level of 1,400 spaces, but I think 700 was mentioned. And finally, that traffic associated with the car park would conflict with overflow parking, which already takes place on Dice Avenue, which would make access difficult. Subsequently, for when the review was submitted, there was an additional response from the airport operator and owner and a response to that from the applicant's agent, which are in the papers. And attention, as I mentioned earlier, was drawn to the application for an extension to the car park at International Gate. So turning to the reasons for refusal, which are stated in full in the report of handling, the key points were that the car park would encourage driving to the area and be inconsistent with supplementary guidance on transport, which is designed to encourage a modal shift to public transport and active travel modes. In terms of the zoning policy, that's B1, business and industrial land, When considered alongside the transport policies, the proposal wouldn't enhance sustainability of the business and industrial land. That even if the car park was restricted to airport users, that would still discourage modal shift to public transport, and that there's no evidence of the lack of parking capacity within the area. And overall, the proposal would be inconsistent with Scottish planning policy, the regional transport strategy, the local transport strategy, policies on transport impact of development and sustainable and active travel in the local development plan. For the applicant's case, there were planning and transport statements, and the points made were that the provision of electric vehicle charging for the airport and Kirkhill area parking, there would be 18 points initially provided, 42 passive spaces, where cabling would be provided for future provision of charging points. Overall, there would be 70 spaces reserved for electric vehicles, and that staff would move cars to charge them for owners so that it'd be fully charged when the owners returned. That it would encourage the move from fossil fuel to electric vehicles by providing the charging points. That the transport supplementary guidance encourages electric vehicle charging, and that there's a limited scope in the existing streets to provide that. It was further stated that passengers with families and small children, etc., with lots of luggage would prefer driving to the airport and parking. That there were only 5 buses per hour at the moment. They made reference to the application, the original application for the car park at International Gate, and the reasons that that was approved by the LRB in terms of consistency. They submitted the parking survey, which showed that there was some overspill parking included on Dice Avenue, and provided photographs of that. Also in the submissions were a car park survey from October 2022 and plans showing other public charging points in the wider city, so covering the whole of Aberdeen City, and there were 56. So I'll now hand back to you, convener, for a decision on how to proceed.
Thank you, Ms. Green. We now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us to take a decision on the application. Members, remember that if you do not feel you have enough information to take the decision, you can request that further written information can be provided, hearings be arranged, or site visit be undertaken. Going on, I would just like clarification as to the 2 late submissions that we've had, and whether we can actually have to take those into account.
I was just going to step in there, convener, so we just need to make a decision whether or not you as members want to agree to accept that documents as late submissions.
Okay.
Yeah. Not late
Thank you.
submissions, but extra information, sorry.
Yeah. It's a bit difficult to do that, considering that we don't exactly know what's in them as to whether they're relevant. However, I think as there's 2 late submissions, I think we should actually take those into account. Councillor Thompson, can you please state if you think you have sufficient information to take a decision, whether you think we should actually take the new submissions in?
I feel that yes, we should take the new submissions just so that we have a full picture.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor MacDonald?
Agreed.
Right, thank you. I suppose that comes back to actually making a decision that we do not have sufficient information at the moment, because we need to take these 2 new submissions in, which this doesn't actually happen very often. So Ms. Green.
Yeah, just to add that the parking survey is within the transport statement of case that we have
Okay, so
on the
that's the
website.
one.
That's in the documents that you've seen. The reference to the other application, that's a non-determined application that's a current one. So we're just, our attention's just drawn to that. It's available on the website. So
Thank you, Ms. Green. On the back of that, and bearing in mind, I got confused there. I thought it was something completely new. That we were getting. Apologies for that. I think I now have sufficient information to proceed with the decision before us today, and I apologise for any confusion that's arisen there to Councillor Thompson and Councillor MacDonald. Councillor Thompson, do you now have sufficient information to make a decision?
Thank you, convener. Yes, I feel that I do. Thank you.
Councillor MacDonald, how do you feel? Do you feel that you've now got sufficient information?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for that. I was just a little bit confused there. I think I was under the understanding it was completely new and not included within the pack. So I think moving on, as we feel we have sufficient information, we will now hear from Ms. Green on the relevant policies and considerations for this review. Back to you, Ms. Green.
thank you. Just share my screen again. Right, on to the policies. So just to reiterate the development plan situation, we have the proposed plan, which has not yet been adopted, expected next week. So the 2017 plan remains extant. Both sets of policies are relevant. NPF4, the National Planning Framework, now carries significant weight, and it's expected to be adopted by the Scottish Government next week. So the site lies within an area zoned under policy B1 business and industry. So the first part of the policy states that land would be retained for class 4, 5 and 6, which a car park is obviously not fall within those uses, but it does go on to state that other uses may be suited to a business and industrial location, such as car showrooms and bus depots, and those shall be treated on their own merits. Finally, it states that where facilities directly support business and industrial uses, those may be permitted where they enhance the attraction and sustainability of the area. So that's policy B1. There are other relevant policies, so I'll move on to. Scottish planning policy, which will fall when NPF4 is adopted next week. That highlights that airports should make master plans and travel plans, and that development should optimise use of existing infrastructure. NPF4 I will cover on the next slide. In terms of the regional and transport strategy and the local transport strategy, those really focus on reducing dependence on the private car, with the regional transport strategy seeking to ensure that access via public transport is available from major population hubs. And the local transport strategy also particularly encourages active travel as well as sustainable transport. Policies T2 on managing the transport impact of development, that's in the adopted plan, and it really relates to travel to new developments, but it similarly to the transport strategy seeks to maximise opportunities for sustainable and active travel. With T3, policy T3 and T2, T3 in the adopted plan and T2 similar within the proposed plan. Those seek to maximise opportunities for sustainable and active travel also. Policy T3 in the proposed plan relates to parking, and it has no particular statement on parking within the outer city, but it does state that all non-residential development should include electric vehicle charging stations. Policies on flooding, drainage and water quality, those state that surface water should be dealt with via sustainable urban drainage systems on site, and a drainage assessment has been submitted with the application, which the case officer considered was acceptable. Transport supplementary guidance, which is linked to the adopted plan, contains a range of guidance on parking, and it also includes requirements for electric vehicle charging in new development. And it does state that it's better to install within new development rather than having to retrofit. And it also encourages a modal shift to active and sustainable travel. Just turning to NPF 4, these are the sort of policies that are cross-cutting across the whole framework. Policy 1, all development proposals should give significant weight to the global climate and nature crisis. Policy 2 is about climate mitigation and in particular emissions. So point C there, I suppose it does encourages development proposals to retrofit measures to reduce emissions. And then policy 3 is about biodiversity and reversing biodiversity loss. So it just states that proposals for local development should include appropriate measures to conserve, restore and enhance biodiversity, etc. So overall evaluation, a reminder of the primacy of the development plan, with applications being determined in accordance with that unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And the basis for the decision in this case would be policy B1. Does it comply with that policy? Sorry, I've got the wrong slide here. But we should be referring to the policies that I mentioned earlier, the regional transport strategy, the local transport strategy, the policies on transportation that were mentioned in the previous slide. And how does the proposal comply with the development plan as a whole? Or are there material considerations which would indicate otherwise? So that's the conclusion of my presentation. I did actually add, just if you were to want to see them, plans showing you where the site was for the application that was mentioned by the applicant. So I've got those if you wanted to see them.
Yes, I think that would be quite helpful.
Okay, I'll show. I can show them now. I'll just share the slides again.
I'm not that familiar with all the parking around the airport, as I don't have a car, so
yeah. Right. Just move on to that one. So this is the application site with the red car. Previous application was on this, so that 2019 application was in this upper part that was approved by LRB, and the current application is in this lower section of the car park. I've just got the site plans on the next slide. So that's the airport up there, just to get bearings, airport roundabout. And these are the hotels with their parking. And the next slide just shows the two applications. So this car park's operational, and this one is a current application that's pending. Sorry, should I leave that up?
No, thank you for that, Ms. Green. It just confirmed exactly where I thought they were, but I wasn't 100% sure. Do members have any questions for Ms. Green? No. I noticed in the original application, or the original, there was going to be access onto, was it Thistle Road from the car park, which would give sort of pedestrian access down to the airport, but that's been removed, hasn't it? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So the only practicable way at the moment would be to walk all the way around, because you could include the sort of non-official path along the side. So have we any idea what kind of distance that would be?
Well, the submission state 1.5 kilometres.
1.5 kilometers. Okay. Okay. Yeah. No, I'm not sure I would actually like to walk that far with the case. And the thing about the shuttle bus, that's regarded as being sort of non-economic, or practicable, on a consistent basis. Is that correct?
Well, the report states that there would be expected to be about 4 cars an hour from the car park. So on that basis, there was questions about how viable it would be to provide a shuttle bus. But obviously, they could provide one at a loss. You know, they could still provide it.
Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, convener. Can I just get clear in my head, when it was mentioned about the COVID testing site, is that the car park that you showed us at the end? Is that a different one, the Wellheads one?
That's a different one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's now operational too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah, that was my only question. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. Councillor Thompson, any questions? No, thank you. In accordance with the procedure note calculated, the review body will now discuss and decide the manner in which the review is to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case have been considered and taken into account. I'm for upholding the officer's recommendation here. And basically it's all around the policies to do with transport, T3 and T2. I don't think that this encourages sustainable transport. Yeah, and that's basically it. I mean, it's interesting, probably on a minor note, encouraging biodiversity. The area at the moment is a green space, and I would be happy if it was going into a land zone for industry, and there was something of merit being built there that would actually encourage employment. But it's just a car park, so I will be upholding the officer's recommendation, mainly based on the sustainable travel aspect of it in policy T3 and T2, and the fact that the land is zoned for industry. Councillor Thompson, would you like to please state your decision in respect for the application and state for the minute the grounds for that decision, referring to planning policy where appropriate?
Thank you, convener. And like you, I am minded to uphold the decision of planning officers. My reasoning being the transport policies T2 and T3. I do not feel that this development would encourage sustainable and active travel, and that there is already adequate provision of car parking within the area, which is also covered in the supplementary guidance on transport. And like you, it is currently a green space in a sea of industry, and for it to be lost under policy B1, I would like to see it something, as you say, that would provide employment rather than just being hard standing for car parking. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tolman. Councillor MacDonald.
Yes, convener, I'm in agreement with both of you, and without going over it all again, it's definitely a national framework which has regional transport strategies and local transport strategies to support active travel and to have a sustainable transport for the airport. And I think that's the main one. But along with yourselves, I agree with B1 that if there had been an application which was to bring more sustainable jobs to the area, that might be considered, but not in this case. And I would be upholding officers' recommendations on those bases of policy as well.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. The local review body has therefore unanimously to uphold the decision of the appointed officer, and the application is therefore refused. Please note that a decision notice from today's meeting will be issued to the applicant or agent after the meeting. And with that, I just like to thank everyone this morning for coming along and taking part in today's LRB. I'd like to thank Ms. Green and Ms. Vicky Johns, and of course Lindsay McBain, and I'd like to call the meeting to a close. Thank you very much.